this computer. Oh yeah. Man, you got like the ultimate background, blur my background. I'm gonna do the same thing.
Well, the reason I'm blurring my background is because my gun room right now looks like a tornado went through it.
Well, I think it's fun to screw around with that stuff. And I'm just sitting here on a beanbag trying to balance so that my back heels straight. Ah,
You gotta keep on it, man.
yeah, I am. Well, sick. What's on the docket for tonight?
So I think, I mean, one of the things we should talk about are all these state bans on manufacturing, how it's going to affect some of these guys that are in the industry.
Sure.
Like I think Washington's the 10th state now to ban manufacturing of certain specific firearms, and in that's like ARs, AKs, and all that type of stuff. The big thing about that is that Air Precision, who just you know who's one of the major do it yourself kind of you know guys over there. They manufacture ARs over there in the Washington area, and then so that's going to be a particular problem for them. And then uh, there are some other companies in that area, and there's the ban is designed to basically well it's they do all sorts of things that are trying to limit for example telescopic lenses and things like that. It's ridiculous.
Wow. That seems incredible. Um,
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like it, they basically banned most semi-automatic rifles based on their uh, uh, their requirements here. It's ridiculous. Like they say, let's see, I can tell you exactly what they are. I've been reading through it, but it's like it's utterly ridiculous the amount of things they're banning at the moment. They're like all AR-15s, all AK-47s. Um, in addition to that, I think certain semi-automatic shotguns even. So
what are the grounds or how are they doing it? And is there like a rationale other than they're simply things that are scary?
well, I mean, the rationale right now, I mean, as we're all aware, there's all these random, crazy people uh, doing stupid things and whatnot. And the biggest deal is they think for whatever reason that if they stop manufacturing those weapons somewhere, they're going to get them somewhere else. Well, I mean, you're just going to end up like you know, they're just these, they're basically banning the sale, they're banning the use, they're banning the manufacturing. They're trying to cut it off at the source, and it's just, I don't even know. I don't think I don't think that it's going to I don't think it's going to hold, to be honest with you, because all of these things are slated to go to the Supreme Court.
Mhm. So what are the major states and then how is that affecting other states or I know you're in Texas. How is it influencing, in your perspective, how is it changing the industry and then
Well, I mean, I think we're going to see that same shift that we saw. I guess I want to say, I mean, during the period of time where some of these states started doing heavy assault weapons bans and things like that on magazines and whatnot, you're going to see a shift, first of all, in the industry. That's the most common thing. You'll see like a shift from all the manufacturers in that locale. And then what they're going to do is they're going to locate more friendly locale to do these type of things. And when they do that, they're going to probably move to states like Texas, for example, or Florida, for example, places where they know that they're definitely going to have a place where they can continue manufacturing and doing business. And then what you'll see from that point on is you'll probably see a surge backwards. But this is all assuming that it's even going to hold, because we know right now the most recent Supreme Court case that talks about infringing on the rights was like, I think it's It's a case out of New York. It was basically, it's like the Rifle Pistol Association of New York. It's the Bruin case. That's what we know it as. And the Bruin case basically holds that, uh, laws that fundamentally impair on foundational firearms rights are unconstitutional. And we see some of the other doctrine come down that basically say that if you have, for example, like the use of a semi-automatic firearm, the the manner in which it looks is irrelevant to the manner in which it could be used. So, like, that's why ARs are so pointless. So, for them to try to ban, because I can go get a Browning bar and do more damage, right? Larger bullet, larger weapon. I can do all that type of stuff. There are numerous weapons that people can keep getting. They're just trying to patch a hole that they think exists that doesn't. And when in doubt, they're just levying whatever they can. So, but Bruin, the whole foundational firearms holding in Bruin was pretty clear. It said that you cannot put any arbitrary. It's not even arbitrary. So the law kind of happened like this up until Bruin. Like, we had the Brady bans and all that stuff, but then Justice Scalia, before he passed away earlier on, he spearheaded an opinion that basically said that, look, the Second Amendment is within the enumerated amendments that that we look at. So they're up there with the right to freedom of speech. They're up there with the right to freedom of press. They're up there with life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights, Fourth Amendment law. All of that stuff is all relevant. And they say Second Amendment is right there with them and all that type of stuff. And the reason why that's super crucial at this moment is because with the way the law is going right now, they're going to have to deal with the unfortunate ramifications of that Supreme Court case. Right, wrong, or whatever side of the aisle you're on, they're going to have to look at it, and they're going to say, look, if the Second Amendment's held to that high of a standard, then they're going to have to provide a level of scrutiny, and the Supreme Court's going to provide a level of scrutiny that basically is going to be something far beyond that of what simply police powers are going to justify a law for. So, I mean, there's several things you could do police powers for, and those are typically types of laws that have, or types of things that affect things that have low scrutiny, right? Like, think bathroom laws and things like that. But when you talk about things like firearms rights, freedom of speech, everything like that, it becomes a huge difference at that point, because now you're arising that level where it is a constitutional protection. And because it's a constitutional protection, the court's going to provide it the highest level of scrutiny. So any law that goes before the Supreme Court, assuming our current mixture of the court holds as is, it's going to be one of those situations that I'm going to find it very difficult to see the court go any other direction other than striking down all these bans, because they tried this. They've tried banning specific parts of weapons. They've tried banning specific stocks. They tried banning specific barrels. They tried banning all sorts of different things. And what we found in this whole thing is the tighter you squeeze, the more stuff flows between your fingers and kind of comes out. It's kind of like squeezing onto water or sand. You could try to get a grip on something, but it's never going to happen. And for whatever reason, I think we're seeing the legislative approach of just squeezing tighter and tighter and tighter. And there's always this knee-jerk reaction. So I think we're going to see a huge sway the other way, probably relatively soon, because when you look at some of these states that have larger firearms manufacturers like Aero Precision, for example, Magpul's moved before. I believe Remington, I mean, in its form right now is being, cannibalized and moved and so on and so forth. But all of these are falling into more friendly states, and these states are going to be the ones that are going to get all the tax revenue, all the sales revenue, all that type of stuff. And I don't care what a state says, these states survive on tax revenue. You don't have that tax revenue from a pure economic standpoint, you're screwed. So I think we're going to see that big pushback. Everything indicates right now from a law perspective, we'll see a turnaround the other way. I mean, everybody wants to protect kids. Everybody wants to do everything that we say, and everybody complains about thoughts and prayers. But push comes to shove in the end, from a legal perspective, we look at the law. And as a lawyer, I have to look at the law. And the law indicates very clearly that there is a line to be drawn. And I think particularly with respect to the Washington ban, we're going to see that law really get tested. And if the Supreme Court shoots it back, that's going to be basically essentially 10 states that get on the chopping block and are going to lose a huge battle in whether or not they're going to be able to ban these things.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm in Colorado, and we're one of the states that is, essentially just kind of waiting for other things to happen. But it's interesting. I went and I took a background check, and you can tell based on the time, the predicted time for the background check to clear, what's going on, and things like this happen, and firearm sales go through the roof. And I think that's an interesting reaction, and so sometimes when you hear news about something, I'll go and just try to get a background check just to see how long it is to get.
Well, there's always that saying, right? Like we always joked during 8 years under the Obama administration, we joke about it, but there's a certain amount of truth to it, right? And every gun shop, every manufacturer all said the same thing. Gun sales have never been higher. Because what they don't seem to understand is, and it goes back to the tighter you squeeze, the more stuff's going to fall between your fingers and so on and so forth, and kind of fall to the wayside or fall down. And I think it's part of that right now. We're seeing a major squeeze right now. And we always joke because Democratic presidents tend to be the best gun salesmen of anybody. You don't have to sell on anything. I mean, during the time that Obama was in office, I mean, that was the rise. I mean, if you look at the industry, that was the rise of the M&P 15. That was the rise of all the Rock River Arms. That was the rise of all the Yankee Hills, and all the small manufacturers kind of came to be because everybody was looking. They didn't even want to buy a gun, most of these people. Everybody was looking to buy one, though, because they figured they couldn't have one sooner rather than later, right? So at that point, with that scare, they just went out and they bought the cheapest thing they could find. And these guys were just cranking out what I consider to be basically, run of the mill, nothing special, I would say base level guns that somebody like you or me, Chris, would look at and we'd be like, no, I don't think it's not that we don't support those companies or things like that, but for our competitive standards, we're looking for something with a couple more bells and whistles, right? I can go buy a Toyota Corolla, or I can go buy like a Ferrari, right? Nothing wrong with a Corolla. It's going to get me point A to point B. But a Ferrari's fancy. It's nice. It's got some bells and whistles, and it's better to race with.
Yeah. No kidding. So how does some of these, like in the past, like how has some of this really driven innovation? Have you seen changes in the manufacturing, or just moving and kind of just waiting for the laws to?
Well, so traditionally what you see in the industry is you see during the times where there's a squeeze on the laws controlling firearms and firearms manufacturing and possession and ammunition and all that type of stuff, you see the industry kind of crawl back to the basics, right? They go through, and because they know people are going after these things, so they know for sure at that point they need to ramp up in production and get as many things out as they can in that meantime, right? This is where these industries tend to thrive. This is not I mean, it's sad, but I've worked in the firearms industry, and I can tell you, R&D doesn't pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
Sales pays the bills. And when it comes down to it, they're looking for these sales, and they're looking for these surges, and that's what you're probably going to see for a period of time. And as long as we have a political climate that's going to try to deter people from buying firearms, what's the first thing you're going to do when you're a child, when your mother tells you not to touch that? Right. You're going to go touch it, right? Yeah. So,
and how does this also, like with ammunition, do you see a kind of parallel where people stockpile, or there's shortages, or because I understand that there's a lot of issues with just the ammunition supply, and so is this kind of a double whammy? Are we going to see?
The ammunition industry always follows, right? So, I mean, we went through an ammunition shortage for a long period of time. I think it was based on COVID period of time all the way through to about 2022 is when it really kind of started to level out, and you could start finding ammunition again. And a lot of these guys, you'll see a grab towards ammunition, because people who buy guns, you have an increased number of purchase of firearms, you're going to have an increased number of purchase of ammunition. But at this point in time, I don't think you're going to see that at the moment, because frankly, half of these people don't know. I mean, the people who buy in this time and buy that knee-jerk reaction, they're not necessarily buying again for use or quality or anything. Like, they're buying it because they're afraid to not be able to have it in the future. I mean, how many times have things gone out of production, or you know companies had trouble selling something, and then they take it off the lot, right? They say, hey, we're not going to manufacture this anymore, and then people go buy it. So I mean, that's kind of the same effect we're having now. And with ammunition, it always follows, but I don't think you're going to see an ammunition shortage from the perspective that we saw before. I mean, you're going to see a lot of the cheaper ammo, the Wolves, the Bernal, the white box stuff, the bulk ammunition, that kind of stuff. You'll probably see some of that stuff go away, and it might be harder to find. But insofar as like what we use, match ammunition and whatnot, and the high quality stuff, yeah, you're probably not going to. I can tell you personally, myself, I'm investing in a nicer reload setup, and I mean, it's just I'm getting back into reloading. I was, I think, of the same attitude you had for a while, which was if I can get comparable field performance for the type of matches that I shoot from factory ammunition, then all the time I would spend reloading and things like that. I'm not necessarily squeezing last bit of accuracy. It's I'm the weakest link at that point.
Mhm.
So you get ammo for that. But I mean, so I think you'll see more brass and things like that disappear over a period of time, because those of us that do have a repeated purchasing need
Mhm.
are going to try to stock up on those items: powder, brass, primers. I mean, we haven't had primers in ages.
Yeah.
So
Right. So,
just
so
depends.
it's like I'm not following all that stuff just because life's been so crazy for me, personally in my body and stuff. But the states now that are dealing with a lot of these firearms battles, are they fighting the same fight, or are there different elements that they're going after?
Well, so right now, I mean, that's the interesting thing about what we track over here at our firm. So what we track on the 2A side is that we track, you know, what people are attacking. And generally speaking, it's a monkey see, monkey do scenario, right?
Interesting.
Everything in the legal side is always oh, they did it. This seems successful. Let's try this too. That's what they do. And so that's why you'll see like states, and this is why Washington's the 10th state. They're not the first state, they're the 10th state. And they're going to keep trying to push this down the line. And it's going to take, X number of months or years before it gets expedited to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's going to turn around and say, we're not going to do this. And then they go back to the drawing board and they think of a new thing, right? Because it's sad, but on the law side, I hate to say it, but as lawyers, we're relatively unimaginative. We just we don't think outside of the box. If you have a good wheel and you think it's going to work, you keep working it. And these legislative guys are the quintessential let's just do what they did scenarios.
Gotcha. But the time frame, is remarkable because it affects people and companies while there's temporary restrictions. That has a pretty profound impact on people and livelihood for
So if in each of these states, and I'm not tracking every single state that's done a ban like this, but I can tell you in each of these states, when you see these type of things, the first thing that comes up is they're going to ask for an injunction or something to basically hold off on a particular law, to say, hey, no, you can't do this, or hey, there's going to hopefully be a favorable federal judge in the area, or reasonable federal judge, should I say, that's going to turn around and say, hey, well, yeah, I'm going to enjoin them from enforcing this law, and that should buy these companies some time, and b you know it gives them essentially that buying power, so to speak, on the political spectrum, right? And they could really have that chance to lobby back. But I hate to say it, but from the gun side, from the firearm side, I don't even want to say the gun side, but just from the principle of what we do, the competitive side, the sports side, the hunting side, never mind self-defense. Let's not even talk about that right now. Let's just talk about the recreational side for a moment, okay? the industry is highly reactive.
Yeah.
And I never could really understand why. It could be because theoretically we have a higher footing in this ordeal, but we're reactive. We wait till something happens and then we defend it. And then we wait for something to happen and we defend it. And and to an extent that works because legislatures are going to do what the legislatures are going to do. Since when's the last time you remember your local representative, or if you even know who your local representative is, actually care about what you thought, right?
Right.
I can tell you in Texas, I mean, they represent the masses, so they kind of get a general idea of what they think that should happen. But realistically, I mean, how do I put this? Government is literally the blind leading the blind. You have somebody who doesn't know anything about anything legislating on something they have no idea or no education about. And then it shows because how many bloopers have we seen about these guys not having any idea what they're talking about? This is a 30-round ghost clip magazine of doom thingy majigger.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
it's like, what? And
Yeah.
they could dispense 100,000 bullets in a quarter of a second. And you're just like, okay.
Yeah. Wow.
First of all, I'm thrilled to know what gun this is you're talking about, because now I want one out of principle. And
Right.
then two, uh uh it makes no sense. Like physically it makes no sense. Everybody thinks for whatever reason there's this some lore, and even among the shooting industry, Chris, I mean, you coach shooters and things like that. How many shooters come to you with some preconceived notion that is completely incorrect
Right.
about how ballistics work, how their firearm works,
Right.
how the general how general technique and anything is supposed to work. You have misconceptions among those that are probably more enthusiast and educated on the matter. You can only expect the same from those who don't ever want to be educated about it.
Mhm.
So, uh, I can tell you, like, we'll see. I mean, I think to give you an idea of what I was talking about earlier, the whole monkey see, monkey do scenario, um, the whole like just everybody's just on a line. Me too, me too, me too. You'll see another one was, I think the one time that I think the states went on, or not the states, but I think firearms activists went on the 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 offensive was when they were trying to talk about interstate commerce. And I don't want to get too much into that, but long story short, theoretically, the federal government should only be governing things that are in interstate commerce. They have no business governing anything that's supposed to be within a state unless it's a power directly enumerated under the Constitution to the federal government. So there was that whole thing talk about, if I have a suppressor made in Texas and it stays in Texas and it never leaves Texas, do I ever have to register that with the ATF? As a lawyer, I will tell you, you better.
Yeah.
Because um, whether right, wrong, or ugly, in the end, we talk about all the way we go on the offensive or the way the industry goes on the offensive. I can tell you that the reason why we don't to a degree is because nobody wants to, and they don't want to screw around and find out, right?
Right.
That,
Right.
that's really the truth of it. Because do you really want to be that guy that gets with a can that has a suppressor that's from Texas, in Texas, and all that stuff? But you're gonna have to spend your legal fees, you're gonna have to spend your time, you're gonna have to spend your livelihood and risk your freedom to go litigate a case against the ATF, which, in my opinion, to a degree, is largely rigged. I
Gotcha.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
they've got infinite resources. What are they going to do to you with infinite resources? Just from that perspective alone.
Right, 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 right. So what are some of the other things? Like I have heard about the suppressor in the state, and I think that it's easy to think, well, that's not fair. And here I've got this clever little solution, but then a lawyer, all they have to say is, well, the tools that we made that used to make the suppressor were made out of the state, and the metal was mined in another state or something like that, right? So eventually somebody's going to find something that comes from another state. But what are some of the other kind of legal loopholes that people try to do, but probably shouldn't?
Well, I mean, everybody knows the Sig brace, and you know what? Look, everybody has their opinion on a brace. Personally, I'm one of the guys that has, I don't really care for the braces. We shoot precision work, all that type of stuff. Uh, you know, whether it's a 14.5 pin and weld, everything that you see in the industry today is some perversion of what the ATF has tried to control. Okay. 16-inch barrel. Now you got 14.5 pin and weld. You've got 13.9 pin and weld. You
Mhm.
have people like Tactical Solution who has a shrouded barrel,
Yeah, yeah.
right? They have a
Explain
12-inch barrel.
the I think that's pretty cool, actually.
Well,
Uh,
the shrouded barrel is a real cool thing for those guys that want to run short weapons, and you know want to be able to run a stock. If you permanently affix, and one of the approved methods, pin and weld is being the approved method that's most commonly accepted. But
mhm.
let's talk pin and weld. Another one would be silver solder if you can find some way to thread it on there or something like that. Um, you could permanently affix a shroud to a firearm and have it reach 16 inches, and just have that shroud, have your suppressor fit under that shroud.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's ugly without a can, but you know what? If you're using it, then I mean, why do you care, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, and this is a proven thing to do. So everybody's freaking out about the Sig brace. And granted, my perspective on it is somebody designed a product, and the ATF made the biggest mistake that any governmental agency could ever do, which is provide guidance and comment on something that is not active litigation, or that is not something that is actively being assessed. And they basically said, "Oh yeah, this is totally okay." And then, of course, as everything happens in the firearms industry, everybody pushes the threshold. So first of all, you have just the buffer tube,
Mhm.
and it's a pistol. Now you have a buffer tube with a flap. Now you have a buffer tube with rubber. Now you have a buffer tube with a hard rubber on the rear end. Now you
Yeah.
have an adjustable buffer tube with a hard rubber on the end. Now you got a buffer tube with a metal piece metal piece with a strap, and you just we push the threshold, right? So if you look at it and you were to look at this from what it really looks at, and I'm always about really analogizing things in the law because it's easier to comprehend. If you look at the federal government as a parent, which is terrifying, okay, but if you look at them as a parent, maybe an abusive parent, a controlling parent, whatever you want to call it, but if you look at it as a parental figure of sorts, then you have to assume all the people that are subject to that parental figure are their kids. And what do kids do when they're told no?
Right.
They
Right.
find a way. So, um, I think this is going to be the proverbial legal circle jerk for the foreseeable future.
See that.
Until somebody finally strikes first blood, or we get a substantial enough ruling one way or another. But even then, we know that's not that's never set in stone, right?
Mhm.
It's the way the politics works and the way the government's set up, um, and the way the Supreme Court works is to its extent the legislative sessions are run as big wind blows, right? The big wind blows, it blows one direction. The only pendulum, the counterweight to any legislative uh, policy that comes down, or new law or anything like that, is the Supreme Court. And a lot of people don't understand this, and lawyers understand this because, well, we should be taught this, but not all law schools are created equal. But lawyers are taught that the Supreme Court and the Constitution is not designed to govern the masses, but to protect the minority. It is something that is set and scripted, and it's supposed to be concrete to protect the minority. So if some jerk off comes over and says, one day I'm taking all your guns, the Constitution has the ability of saying, no, this is where the line draws. And it doesn't matter how many people vote, because in the end, you're going to have enough states to subscribe to amending the Constitution for that to work. And I think we understand purely from a historical and political perspective, which I'm a big fan of, you're not going to get. you can't, that's what they always say, reasonable minds differ. You can't rub together two people that come to an agreement on anything these days.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm sure you and I have different philosophies on certain aspects of firearms and shooting and all sorts of things, albeit when it comes to accuracy, you're probably right and I'm wrong.
But I think that you know, it's interesting, especially now with social media and the availability of being able to broadcast things to the folks and get people excited without a whole lot of background. And so people get scared and you know, amongst the shooting community, you see these waves of kind of panic. Oh my
Well,
gosh. And
that's kind of where you get the danger to a certain extent, right? What they don't seem to understand is the very policies that are designed to curb the purchase of firearms are the very policies that are proliferating the purchase of firearms at the same time, right? They're pushing for that purchase, right? And what they don't seem to understand is if you have a person who was never that interested in a firearm to begin with, and then say they go out and buy one, right? They should go. They just as a person should naturally do. You should learn your craft,
right.
and uh, at the very least, you should be familiar with your craft. And a lot of these people will take their stuff and shove it in a safe or put it in a handgun safe or something like that and leave it there in perpetuity until one day they feel they want to do so. And that's fine. I think people should have the right to do that.
Mhm.
Uh, I also believe that from my personal philosophy, I'm one of those people that if I want to learn something, I'm going to learn everything and anything about it. I'm going to read it. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to ask the questions that are necessary to be asked and do so. I mean, shooting these field matches, for example, that where I met you, right? Um, it's one of those things like we want to learn the craft. We want to get better at what we do. We want to be more proficient at what we do. We want to close the error room, the room for error, our error margins, and we want to do that. That's what it's all about, right? So there are those people who try it out and find it's not their cup of tea too, and I think that's fine. But from a legal from what we see from a legal perspective, when it comes to whether or not these people should or should not possess firearms or whatever, I think you absolutely should. And I think the court got it right. I think continue doing what we're doing now. But if anybody wants to be smart about it, we should probably spend a little bit more time, a little less time telling them no, and a little bit more time of, hey, how about let's do some overall education. That's something that we've seen fall by the wayside in the last 40 years. The number of people who are the hunter safety courses, the attendance to hunter safety courses, the attendance, the teaching of firearms as you grow up, all that type of stuff has kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you see the lack of education carry more over, and sadly enough, society becomes dumber for it.
Mhm. Right. Right. They don't understand the safety.
These days, I saw the other day, I think Chris Roberts mentioned, you know, how many people go out and spend I don't want to say millions of dollars, but thousands upon thousands of dollars on gear and then don't know how to use it.
Right. Right.
And the thing is like, if that's your thing and you're a collector, you're right, go for it, buddy. I'm not going to make fun of you for it. But the idea is don't purport to be the person that knows what they're doing without being the person that knows what they're doing. And then from a legal perspective, I think that goes the other way too, which is don't purport to know anything about firearms and legislate about them unless you know what about firearms to legislate about them.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, like it infuriates me to a certain degree when we see these type of things pop up about, just from both sides, both spectrums, right? One is the spectrum I'm in, which is I want to learn, all the way to the ones that don't want to learn, to the ones that are just too afraid to learn, and those that have some preconceived notion that absolutely refuse to learn. That's the whole spectrum. So
Yeah.
it's pretty garbagey all the way around.
Huh.
We
So
call it a dumpster fire.
the so like the listeners, like obviously everybody listening and watching are gonna you know, they're gonna be a different subset of people, but are there things that, you know, a lot of us are doing that maybe we're not quite aware of how close we're getting to a line legally or that you guys see commonly where it's like, oh shit, I didn't realize I stepped over the line?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that surround um, the line that people draw, right? So, one of the things that I've always found that seems to be a little bit of a line that people think is blurred is constructive possession.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't even understand constructive. I say the word constructive possession, and the vast majority of the people are going to be like, yeah, I know what that means. And then really in practice, they don't understand what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. I give you an example. A perfect example of constructive possession. Let's hypothetically say I have a 10.5 inch lower or upper, excuse me, 10.5 inch AR-15 upper, right? And I'm like, yeah, I have this 10.5 inch upper. I do not have a single SIG brace, and I do not have a single I do not have a single pistol lower. Everything I have is a rifle based lower in my household. And I have a 10.5 inch upper sitting here. That is an example of touting the line of constructive possession. If somebody were to come in, what is the natural step it would take for me to take that 10.5 inch and illegally put it on
Right.
a rifle, right? And a lot of people are like, well, I just keep this, or I just keep that, or I just do this, or I just do that. And they think it's something that allows. Another one is those stupid solvent cans, the solvent traps.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that people go out and they say, oh well, this is a solvent trap. It's threaded 5/8 by 24, and it captures the solvent while I can push this pad all the way through these knot baffles to the other end. And and I've had friends come and say, "Oh no, it's a solvent trap." I'm like, you keep telling yourself that, but in the end, do you really want to be the test subject for that litigation with the ATF, buddy?
Yeah.
And
Right.
then they go, "Oh yeah," and and I hate to say it, but those are the kings of what we call the fuck around and find out. But again, it's kids trying to circumvent the rules, right? It's a verbiage, it's a form over substance issue, and I would never ever tell anybody to take that to the bank. Don't ever be like, oh yeah, I called it this. But more and more we see that. I mean, you could say my suppressor identifies as a solvent trap.
Right. Yeah.
All right, low blow, unnecessary, but
Well, but I get it. Like, people get dangerously close, but when push comes to shove, those arguments, yeah, I mean, screwing around with the legal system is a hell of a lot different than like, oh yeah, this sounds good.
yeah,
And then
it's
you get on YouTube and stuff like that. You think, holy shit.
the
Yeah.
the
Balls.
other thing is people. I mean, there are certain lines that I think that people tout all the time that I actually find somewhat acceptable. One of the ones that I always say, and I personally don't do this, but I can tell you that I know several that do. I knew a friend that used to work at a certain state agency, and the building absolutely prohibited non-peace officers from carrying a firearm into the location,
Mhm.
and they'll carry in there. They'll straight up just put it in their backpack and walk in there. They have no intention of using it or anything like that. It's there purely, and they're CHL holders and everything to that degree. But I find it more difficult to say no, you shouldn't carry that, because in the particular building he worked in, let's just say there are regular people who actually provide death threats to that building and bomb threats to that building.
Right.
And it would not be, I would expect that place, if any place were to get, have unfortunate circumstances, I would want to carry there too. That's just, so that's another legal line that a lot of people tout. I think that one's probably a little bit more acceptable than most people would find that probably a little bit more acceptable.
Right.
But the that those are the most common ones. Testing the short barrel rifle line has always been one thing that people have done. The suppressors are another thing that people have done. And then it drives me nuts, but the number of people that play with particularly rules on the sale of firearms, that one I see a lot. You see a lot of these backyard manufacturing of firearms or buying and selling of firearms with an FFL. That one right there, I see a lot. I have a lot of clients come to us and they say, well, you know, I I don't I'm not in the business of selling guns. And then you ask them, well, how many have you sold this year? And they're like 170. And you're like, I know
Wow.
some that have difficulty selling 170.
You're right. Right.
So it's one of those things. And these guys are like, oh no, I do it as a hobby. I buy it and I shoot it for a while and then I sell it. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't have the right to sell it or you shouldn't go, but if you're going to be doing it that much, the piece of advice I give to people who tout that line, even though you can do a private purchase,
Mhm.
um, is to go through an FFL, because if you go through an FFL, it washes you clean of that. Essentially, if I turn it into an FFL and an FFL does a transfer to a third party, it is no it. I'm not doing business. I'm simply tracking the sale of that firearm, and I'm doing it properly. And the ATF's not going to be any care for it.
Right. Right. That makes
Those
sense. That
things that
makes
we
sense.
see all the time. Um, I've seen people take short barrel rifles across state line. That's dumb. Don't do that. That's a one way ticket to get in a new butthole.
Yeah.
So, but those are the kind of things that we see most commonly. The funny thing is as competitors, you and I, in the industry, as we shoot, we know most of the firearms rules. But it's again, it comes down to those people who think. I'm sure you've heard of this before. There are those people who don't know anything. There are those people who know as much as they'll ever know, and then there are those people who know just enough to be dangerous.
Mhm.
That's the category that we find treading the line most common, the people who know just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah. Right.
And people come to us all the time. Well, and the general rule of thumb is if a conversation approaches a legal professional and they say something to the effect of this, I got a legal question to ask you. I was wondering if you thought this was legal. If you have to ask me,
Right.
you already have an idea.
Right.
And you're like, what?
Yeah. Gotcha. I, I
It,
I used to work in a lab that studied toxicology. I remember these guys came in, they were foraging mushrooms. And we had one guy that specialized in mushrooms, but these two guys came in and they had this big bag of mushrooms and they're like, "Can we eat these?" And he said, I wouldn't. And they're like, "Well, I heard we could." And he said, "Well, some people do, but I wouldn't eat them." And they're like, "Yeah, but we want to eat them, or could we smoke them?" And he's like, "I wouldn't, but they're like, but I heard some people smoked them." And he's like, "Yeah, some people do, but they're like, well, we just want to know if we could eat them." And he goes, "Well, you should probably like, um, put a little." A label on your chest. And if you're going to do that stuff, just do it outside of the hospital and says, "I ate these mushrooms." Um, and like, you're thinking like, man, these guys came and asked, but what, like, why would they come to this lab in order to ask? Like, obviously they knew the answer too. Like, they probably shouldn't, but they were hoping maybe he would say like, "Oh yeah, hell yeah, just eat them," but it was like, "No, dude, you're gonna freaking you know yeah."
well, I mean, there is all that. There is also the old adage that says, you never got anything that you didn't ask for. So, but at the same time, like there is a serious lacking of common sense to a degree these days. But I digress. I mean, there's just we, but that's a lot of what it is. And if you look at firearms and the way we look at them nowadays, I'm just going to tell you right now, and I take extreme caution when I say this, but it makes sense in my head, and it and I can see so many things wrong with what I said, but it makes sense because this assumes that there is some sort of base norm for common sense. But when you think about what you're going to do when you store, create, experiment, do whatever with your home arsenal or shrooms, um, you may want to make sure you should probably exercise common sense. But the problem is more often than not, people disregard common sense, and then they try to couch it as, well, it made sense to me.
Right, right. It
And
may,
you're just off, buddy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So when it
So,
comes down to like, people coming in for 2A kind of cases, are there like, this is the most common kind of thing that comes to you, and here's another set, here's another tier, or what are some of the like just
most
common things that people run into trouble with?
most common ones that we see is the restoration of firearms rights. And you know, the law is relatively clear about the you know felons are not supposed to be possessing firearms, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
uh, Violent crimes can't possess firearms, and so on and so forth. But we see quite a few of those, and we get quite a few cases that come in that are somewhere along the line of, hey, we want to restore our firearms rights. I was my wife filed something against me, some domestic thing or something like that, and there's nothing founded for it. And in most of those instances, if you wait the requisite amount of time, you get your firearms rights back.
Mhm.
So that's some of those instances. Another one is like, you were arrested but you were never found guilty. There's other things like restraining orders, protective orders. I mean, you do the whole host of them, and we deal with a lot of vets in our firm. Uh, you know, and as a result, a lot of them come to us, and unfortunately, we deal with some situations where, you know, like for example, uh, vets will come to us and say, well, I was in the military for this long, or whatever, and I had this incident that occurred, right? And I'm like, well, what was your discharge status? The first thing I asked. And if it's anything other than dishonorable discharge, there's probably a way around it. And provided you haven't been a violent criminal for any reason, you should be able to get your firearms rights, and there shouldn't actually be any inhibition on them. But some of the more other ones that we see, because there's misdemeanors and things like that that prevent you from getting firearms, but you just had to, again, wait the requisite amount of time. So we deal with a lot of firearms rights issues as a common thing where people come and ask us about. Another one is we do a crap ton of compliance, a metric ton of compliance for all sorts of FFLs, all sorts of manufacturers and stuff like that. I can't tell you how many times I've had to spend, how many hours I've had to spend looking at crappy blue books and records and all sorts of things, sourcing and finding, and basically essentially doing an internal ATF audit. And I'll tell you this, there are enough home FFLs and enough uh, registered FFL manufacturers and stuff that are not considered to be, your bigger bears with massive compliance departments, and they completely don't understand how to do compliance.
Oh, gotcha.
And we look at their books and we're like, oh my God, this is a train wreck. And then we go through and we kind of give them how to fix it. And most of them actually do. And when the ATF guy comes in, he's like, man, I saw these issues, but you already reconciled these issues, so you're good to go. Who taught you how to do this? And that's how our name kind of got around to some of these things.
Gotcha.
Um, and in most of these instances, being as I shoot pretty regularly and I do compete, a lot of these guys, these companies and such, run into me at these matches and things like that. So,
Hmm.
and they come to you, like, but I think if I remember correctly, even large companies get tagged for this. Stag Arms
Hmm.
got hit with this.
For compliance.
Oh yeah, I think it was. I'm not entirely positive. Let's see.
And then so the is it the ATF that says you got to deal with this stuff, and then they come to you guys and say we need help, or
Yeah.
how does that
Well,
happen?
so what happens is, I mean, and then it goes to show you that you don't know what you don't know, so you can't ask questions about what you don't know.
Mhm.
And so as a lawyer, we deal with the unnatural or the natural aspect of that, which is they either come in way too early or they come in way too late. Nobody, I think in the entire time I've been in practice the last 12 years and doing all this type of stuff, is I don't think, I can't recall, but like maybe a handful of times that I've ever had somebody come in when they needed to come in.
Right.
It's either shit has hit the fan or nobody's even taken a shit yet.
Right. Right.
And it looks like, yeah, it looks like back in 2015-ish or 2014, 2015-ish, it looks like ATF hit Stag Arms for a lot. I remember that being the case. We looked into that, but they hit them on a massive set of violations.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you can.
But these aren't things that would affect the individual necessarily, and I was trying to just think like, what does the everyday, gun owner maybe get in trouble with and need legal help, on average. So like, right, if
Well,
something happens, use your gun
the
right.
overall
That's
amount of things that we see from the individual is they want to possess an NFA item. They want a suppressor. They want a short barrel rifle. They don't want a short barrel shotgun. They want an AOW. They want something that is an NFA item, and they don't know how, and they think it's some mystical or mystifying process, right? Because anytime you talk about, and they always come in and say, "Oh, I got to get licensed for this." I was like, "Slow your roll, buddy. You don't have to get licensed for it." And basically they don't understand the benefits of a trust. They don't understand the benefits of an individual transfer. They don't understand why to use a corporation, why to use a trust, or why to use an individual transfer. So we do a lot of that type of stuff, and we probably see, you know 20, 30, 40 gun trusts,
cool.
you know probably one a day at one point, and it's slowed down a little bit. But for the people who want to do that, I always urge people to step away from they serve their purpose. So I'm not going to put them down. Okay. But there are a lot of these companies that put out these canned trusts, and they say works in all 50 states. And that's absolutely, well, I can't say it's absolutely correct because I haven't seen the most updated forms, but that could possibly be correct. Because in the state of Texas, for example, anybody can create what we call a living trust,
Mhm.
or in vivos trust is what we call it. Or, I mean, just your typical trust, right? If I were to walk over to you, Chris, and you were in Texas, and I were to say, here's $50, you're instructed to hand this $50 in 1 week to Frank Galley, right? What
Mhm.
I've done is I'm the grantor of the trust, you're the trustee, and Frank Galley's the beneficiary. And you've got a set of instructions you're supposed to follow.
Mhm.
That's as simple as a trust. That's really what a trust is. It's entrusting somebody with something. The
Mhm.
trust, as lawyers do, we complicate things. We basically put it in writing, and then we put all the contingencies and everything in there. If you simplify a trust, yes, you can create a trust in almost any situation. The problem that you end up having is that the trust that you buy, that's a canned trust for $50, $99, $49, all the ones that I've seen, they don't contemplate a whole lot of things that occur when people typically possess firearms. Like, I hate running into trusts where they treat a firearms trust like an estate planning trust.
Mhm.
Don't do that.
I don't know the difference.
So estate plan, I mean, they're both trusts and they're both useful for their particular reasons, but it's like it's like I wouldn't shoot my rifle in a USPSA match, and I wouldn't shoot my pistol in a field rifle match, right? They serve two different purposes, but they're both firearms.
Mhm.
They're just for different purposes. An estate planning trust can, if you want it to, double as a firearms trust, although we generally try to separate the firearms aspect of the NFA stuff from your estate planning, because we don't want it to, if there is a change or a massive shift or a massive ban or a law or something like that, we don't want your NFA stuff to hold up anything that may happen from an estate planning perspective. We don't want that to go into litigation or get coughed up for any reason. So we keep them separate. But one of the biggest things that I always see is people say, "Oh, well, I don't want my trust to go away if I die." And I think actually there was a recent thing about this with Disney, but they talk about the rules against perpetuities.
Hmm.
Yeah, I will, it's basically, it contemplates the last life in being, and basically it can't exist 30 years after that person, his last life in being is been deceased. So the rules against perpetuities, all that type of stuff, we don't pay attention to that. Don't get that far into the analysis. I'll simply say this. If you have a bunch of cans and you pass away, from a you perspective, it's not your problem anymore. You're dead.
Right.
Why do you care? Right. But for some reason, and I had a professor in law school that said this very well. For some reason, we found that there is some necessary way to keep alive the memory of the person that's deceased by trying to carry out some of their wishes as if they would make sense, right? Because people come up with all sorts of cockamamie things. So what we talk about is on the death of a settlor of a trust, those items need to pass out of that trust to the heirs and whoever to take those items, and then they can put it in their trust or take it into their individual self, right?
Well, maybe, we should just have another call specifically around trust.
I would agree with that. Unfortunately, the whole aspect of trust law and firearms trust gets there's a lot of, but what if,
Right. Right.
but
Well,
that's one of the most
I
common
feel
things.
I feel like we're opening up like another hour of because I'm really fascinated with that. I don't have a trust. I just have the stamps, the individual stamps. But you hear like, well, if you have it fascinates me, not enough to get one, but I find it interesting. So let's say, yeah, you're talking about the guy that has a trust, dies, his heirs inherit his suppressors. Do they have to go through the
They do Form 5 transfer, which is a tax-free transfer.
Gotcha.
And basically, you don't have to pay this tax stamp or anything again. They basically can transfer the item into their new trust, or take it individually, if you will, or their corporation, however they want to carry it out, right? But some people want to keep it in their trust, and the problem is the last thing you want to happen is to have a trust and have beneficiaries or trustees squabbling over something or not being able to find something or anything like this. By expiring the trust and creating and making them disseminate the items, you are effectively requiring them to self-audit. And I think that's an important approach. Some lawyers disagree with me, but I can tell you I've been in litigation with that stuff, and I can tell you it ain't pretty, and I can tell you they almost always get destroyed or liquidated, and then nobody gets them.
Right.
Because when you actually have a true dispute among the trust assets, and they can't do anything but to do away with the trust because of invalidity or something like that, and nobody can agree where those items go, it's you sell and you liquidate, you move on.
Right.
Nobody wants that.
Right. Yeah. Total hassle.
Yeah. So, I mean, we a lot of this stuff, and a lot of these guys watch. They think. I just tell people, look, even if you're going to go buy one of those can trusts, take the time to consult with an attorney at the very least to understand the provisions of the trust. I can tell you how many people I've talked to, and they don't even know who a trustee is. They don't know what a trustee is, and they are a trustee.
Yeah. Right.
So
like, okay, so but some people see the price tag. They say, okay, well, it's $50. I could do this online. Well, how much would it cost to go to a firm and have it dealt with, in person? What's the cost difference between the two?
I can tell you our firm does a flat fee for creating a trust from beginning to end, $250. And then and for a large part, if you have any questions about that trust, I have clients that I did trust for back in 2012. They call and ask me a question, and I'm like, sure. And they're like, do you remember me? And I was like, vaguely. And I was like, just send me a copy of your trust, because it's my form. It takes me all of 3 seconds to know what I wrote, right? I'm still pretty good about what I've done. And I'll look through it and be like, you can do this, 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 and this, and this. And they're like, okay, cool, thank you.
Right.
And that's really the vast majority of it. And if you don't do that, and you have a single shot trust, or you have one of those standalone trusts, and then somebody goes about and tries to ask questions about it, unfortunately, it may take the attorney longer to fix it or whatever. And we've had people who try to fill out their own trust to fill in the blanks, and that's a fiasco.
Yeah.
That you want to talk about a dumpster fire in a rainstorm? That's what it is right there.
Right.
Yeah, and then it takes longer to fix things. Like I've had clients come to me and do that. So, I mean, I don't want to get too much into trust, but it's like you said, I could talk trusts all day long. I've done CLEs on trusts. I've talked about the nuances of what should go in a trust, what shouldn't go in an NFA trust. Uh, you know, and it's just one of those things that a lot of people don't really think about because they think because if you can buy it online for $49, it must not be that important.
Yeah. Right. But the difference between $50 and 250, like if you know, as a shooter that has a lot of firearms and equipment, like $250, shit, man, I shoot that in ammo in a day. So the context there is like, you know, like right. You get something that's worth it and lasting and has somebody that understands it versus I don't know what I'm doing. And I could just imagine filling out a form like that myself and then, you know, showing it to you and being like, oh my God, what did you do? Because um, you know, you just that's how people are, right?
I've got actually, you know, that there's that song that everybody talks about on it's this it's an Instagram like music short, but basically it just goes, oh no, oh no, oh
Yeah.
no. I actually have that queued on a little on my phone, and it's actually on my main page. I can play it because I have clients come in all the time, and I read it, and they're like, "What? They already know something's wrong. That's why they're in my office."
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'll flip over my phone, and they're like, "What?" And I'll just play the file, and then they're like, "Oh God, let me fix it for you." And then the thing is they say, well, this, and we've seen a lot of this stuff where they go, hey man, I've sent in this trust 4 times and it's been fine every time. And then
Mhm.
this fifth time you got kicked back
No.
and fix those issues.
Mhm.
And some of those are just, you know, there's a spelling error, there needs to be an amendment, maybe there's some weird trustee issue, something like that. But we go with the gambit of issues. And I will say this, in my opinion, they're few and far between because the most people who do their trust kind of set it and forget it. I can't tell you the number of people that have like one can, you
Yeah.
know. And if your objective is to get one can and never get another can, your chances of going hunting or shooting or anything like that is like if you're the quintessential 3 rounds for sight in each hunting season and then 1 round for your animal and then you take it home, you do it, more power to you. Great. You probably got way better eyes and great hunter, but you probably don't need a trust either.
Yeah.
Now, if you're that, it's going to be like, hi, I'm on my 67th stamp.
Right.
Trust may not be a bad idea.
Right.
So, I mean, I can tell you, you know, I was wondering if I do kind of want to talk about kind of just some of the stuff coming up, like even among the shooting circuit right now, you know, I think just since we're talking about can suppressors, legalities, and all that stuff, it's not so much of an issue with short barrel rifles, for example, bringing them across state lines and whatnot, but we talk about just carrying of weapons through state lines and then carrying of suppressors. A lot of people think they're one and the same because they're both under the NFA, but that's not the case. I want to be very clear here. Short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, short barrel firearms cannot be carried across state lines to another jurisdiction without the ATF's notice and approval. However, suppressors can be carried through any state in general, and you can keep it in a state or you can take it to a state and use it in that state in which it is legal. So there's a big difference there. Suppressors you can take with you, short barrel guns you cannot.
Oh,
And
interesting.
we'll talk about the problems with the SIG brace. What if they could do away with the SIG brace? What does that do to people who have all sorts of different hocus pocus problems with that? But
Yeah, well, let's make that the next talk
yeah,
about state line suppressors and
about
competitors.
or things like suppressors in competitions now.
Mhm.
They're becoming more common.
Yeah.
Particularly, I mean, because you and I have talked in the past about me shooting team matches,
Mhm.
and I think we've got one coming up, Team Safari. You and I are going to shoot together on that one,
Yeah.
uh, barring your well being and you getting better and everything like that. But you know, there are benefits to running cans and matches where there's a requirement for team communication.
Sure. 100%.
And so you see a lot of like I see a lot of guys shooting cans. I mean, they suffer a little bit more recoil or a different recoil impulse. But generally, when you're carrying a 18-pound rifle shooting a 6 Creedmoor, you're not suffering that much recoil from the get-go. But uh, so I will say that you know we do see more traveling with cans now. And the one thing I always want to caution people to is if you're traveling with your can, please, for the love of God, you don't have to carry your trust on you. You do, you are required, you are supposed to carry your Form 4.
Mhm.
If you go somewhere with a can and you don't have your Form 4, it could be a host of problems for you. And the best way to do it is I do it like this. I take all the pictures of my tax stamps on my phone and I don't let them upload into Google because I don't like that. But I have them in a non-clouded box. And that way, if anybody ever comes and says, "Hey, look, is this can yours? Show me your Form 4." I'm just like, "Here, let me get my phone. Here's a Form 4. We're good."
That's a good idea.
So, and it's been one of those things. And then, but yeah, I mean, we'll see more and more of that. I have a sneaking suspicion that we'll see more and more suppressors and more NFA items going to matches nowadays. You even see them in PRS, don't you?
I mean, I haven't been to a PRS match in a long time, but I imagine that there's got to be guys that are shooting them. And in the field matches, people are shooting them all the time.
I
Um,
remember there being a PRS match recently where they required you to shoot
oh, there
cans.
was one, I think it was in Kansas, that was suppressor only. And I think there's some that are night suppressor matches.
Mhm.
Um, but that's like a theme. So I don't know about the non required ones. My guess is there's got to be a good fraction of people that just want to shoot with a suppressor. Um,
It
just
is pleasant.
yeah, yeah,
But no, I mean, I think we could definitely talk about, and some subsequent things. I'd love to. I think we should focus on trust. I think a lot of people could benefit learning a little bit about what their trust does and
yeah,
give a mini consult, if you will.
yeah. I think
Listen,
super cool. Like I'd be fascinated personally, and then yeah, some of the issues of traveling and some of those complications. But yeah, I mean, it's just cool to hear about, and some people are familiar with it, and probably most aren't. So it's nice just to hear about issues, and if people are excited, then they could reach out and try to learn more. So I think that's been really cool.
it's anybody who listens to this, if they have any questions or anything, I don't know on your YouTube or your podcast, I'm sure they could leave a comment or something like that. If they ever want to ask any particular questions or anything, we can kind of go through a Q&A at the beginning of the next session and talk about anything that anybody's got,
That'd be awesome.
on
And I
how
can put out even on like Frank's live stuff and on social media, like, hey, what kind of questions do you have? And we can rock that too.
yeah. I mean, we do that quite often. Like, that's kind of the MO for our CLEs. When we do CLE stands for continuing legal education. We're required to do like a certain number of hours every year, and I usually teach at least one session each year, and it's usually firearms related. So
It's
everybody
awesome.
in my area is like, there's the giant Asian guy that knows all about guns. And I'm like, I know enough, but um, when we talk about the 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 CLEs and whatnot, we get a lot of people who follow us, and then after the CLE, they post it online, right? So other people can watch it,
Yeah.
and we get questions all the time. They'll call us up and be like, "Hey, were you the guy that did the CLE?" And and we have other lawyers that ask us questions.
Oh,
I mean, a lot of people assume that, yeah, sure, everybody's a lawyer, but there are lawyers for certain things. You wouldn't expect your neurosurgeon to do your cardiac, your heart surgery, right? You wouldn't expect your heart surgeon to do your neuro. Bad
yeah,
things happen when that goes on. So we each kind of have our little specialties. Mine is within risk compliance and mitigation. So this falls well within that.
yeah.
But
Like,
yeah,
let's do that again. Like maybe, we can record it in any time and then we'll just start getting these pumped out regularly. I think it'd be fun, and it's pretty easy and we chat all the time anyway. So if, it's just, as soon as we get our schedules kind of in cahoots, shit, we could do these as often as you want.
yeah. I mean, between that, I'd also like to talk about some workarounds since we talked about workarounds today.
Yeah.
For happens when your sig brace goes away.
Right, right. Yeah, that'll be important, right? I actually have one. Um, and with everything that's been going on, I still haven't done the stupid form. So I got to get that going.
Yeah, I've got one myself. I don't have a brace, but I need to do a form on one that I've had for a while, and I've just been too lazy to do so. I think I have like 12 stamps sitting at FFL that I just never ever bothered to apply for.
Yeah.
It accumulated. I feel really bad.
Yeah.
Calling, like, are you going to come get your stuff? And I'm like, well, I haven't applied for
Right.
the stamp yet, but I'll work to it. And they're like, man. I was like, look, for the amount I'm going to pay for a stamp, I can go buy like a night course attacker or something like that.
Right. Right. Yeah. So yeah, man. But it'll
So
be cool. Like so let's rack this up so that it's not like too incredibly long, and then we'll just pick up and in a couple days bang another one out, and we'll just try to make a schedule, a tempo where we can chat about this cool stuff. And if something pops up, just write it down or call me and I'll write it down so that we can have context and
yeah,
target. But this has been fun.
yeah, I always enjoy our talks, man. It's always a blast, and like I said, we listen to your I listen to it on Spotify all the time. When a new one comes out,
Mhm.
it's the best commute stuff to listen to in the morning because like it actually gets your brain thinking.
Mhm.
Like I'm always like, because I don't want to think about work on my way to work. So I'm always like, oh, he's talking about matches. He's talking about, the training aspect and everything like that. So that's why we always listen to that. And speaking of training, I need to get some of that done. So
Yeah, me too, man. Well, I'm closing on being able to lift 20 pounds. So after I cross that 20-pound threshold, I'll be able to pick up a rifle and
I was just about to say, you're staring at that 16-pound rifle right now. You're like, oh man, if I put a carbon fiber barrel on that, put a titanium action, I could probably pick that up real soon.
yeah, I mean, a lot of my rifles are, lighter than the 15 pounds. The issue is when you put them in a case and, all of a sudden that's not 15 pounds anymore. And then you got ammo and all this stuff. And it's like, shit, this thing is 30 pounds. I'm not allowed to pick it up. So what do? Am I going to make 6 trips to the truck with stuff and then get to the range and then make 6 trips? And it's like, man, I'll just wait till I can pick the whole thing up. And it's coming soon though.
Well, man, I'm looking forward to seeing you get back on your feet on that stuff because you know, I got to make it. I should probably make it up to Colorado sometime, and we'll kind of work out some of the partnership stuff for the for the October match. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward.
And we could do talks about that too. I'm
Yeah,
gonna hit the record thing here, but